2014 marks the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the Great War, and so Harold Averill, Marnie Gamble, and I thought that it would be an opportune moment to actually use archival materials at the U of T and at Soldiers Tower and the Fisher to actually describe and provide a history of the war in the University of Toronto. When war was declared in August 1914, the university wasn't prepared. And in fact, Sir Robert Falkner was on vacation in Europe overseas. But when he did come back, the first varsity headline in September 30th, 1914 was, the University of Toronto will do its share. So most of the cases actually document the resources and the extent to which the university went to actually do its share. The first case is really the university heading into the war. So it talks about the first year, it talks about the establishment of the COTC. We also talk about some unexpected issues. So for example, the public and politicians were concerned by German professors being here at the University of Toronto, and President Falkner defended them, and actually at one point was basically accused of treason for protecting these individual professors. The students and most of the faculty wanted them to remain here, but the Board of Governors and the general public didn't. And in this display section, you can actually see a cartoon of President Falkner dealing with the issue. We also have the development of the Canadian Officer Training Corps. During the first few years, they decided to end classes early at 4 o'clock, so the men could go marching and the women could go work in the Red Cross room. So it was interesting as the university enters the war, because on the one hand, it's accused of being a recruitment machine. On the other hand, it's accused of not doing enough. And in fact, there was a time when some politicians actually wanted the university to close down because it thought that it was basically a haven for war resistors. So we deal with that in really the first two cases. The university was also impacted by the war in a very physical sense as well. The university actually had to make space for military units. And the most predominant of those was actually the Royal Flying Corps, which later became known as the RAF. And they took over areas of Wycliffe College, the back campus, the examination halls, parts of Hart House before it had been completed as well. And so that case actually physically shows you the presence of the Royal Flying Corps. And it has one of the, I think one of the iconic images from the archives, which is the photo of the Sopwith camel on the front campus, which really demonstrates how much the military really took over parts of the campus. There's also the famous image of Lawrence Harris's Belgian village that he had created as well, because the School of Musketry were actually using Hart House at the time for their practices as well. So, if you can imagine being here in 1915, 16, and 17, there was a huge presence of the Royal Flying Corps here on campus. And then in the following cases, we go into the Canadian Officers Training Corps and the Overseas Training Corps. There was a training corps here on campus, and there's the iconic Goodman Bugle there, which was used to call the corps. In the subsequent cases, we talk about the Canadian General Hospital No. 4, which was a University of Toronto hospital, and they served in Greece and later in Basingstoke. And it's an amazing story. They had a 1,000-bed hospital out in Greece, and they worked under tremendous conditions. Their first camp was really just tents. They spent the winter there, and a lot of the staff there themselves came down with malaria. Most of the cases were actually diseases rather than battle or war wound injuries. And then the other cases are other units, or units in which other people affiliated with the U of T would have served. So we have the 67th Battery. We have some fabulous photographs from the Bicycle Corps as well there. So if you want to see men in bicycles, there you go. Men on bicycles in soldiers' outfits. We also tell individual stories as well. And we decided to tell 3 stories in this case, and it's not because their stories are necessarily unusual. It's just that we actually had a lot of archival information on them. But the more you look at these stories, the more I do think they're unusual and very interesting. So we tell the story of Harold Innes and his time at war. We tell the story of two cousins, the Wrong and Blake cousins. We also tell the story of Roy Coburn and his sister Harriet. Coburn served in Egypt, and Harriet actually was a doctor who served in Serbia as well. And then at the end of the day, because all of these individuals had experiences that really affected them deeply, we also talk about how the university chose to remember that as well. And the first memorials at U of T to people who had died in the war actually popped up at University College as early as 1914. And individual colleges had their own ways of memorializing or marking their efforts during the war. But in our final case, we actually document what the U of T did as a whole. And one of the most significant things it did was actually create a roll of service, which is a book that actually detailed every single person affiliated with the U of T who served. It actually documents his role, his service in the war. And that was incredibly significant, determining who went where and when, and it's an incredibly valuable archival resource. And the University of Toronto also established Soldiers Tower. And as early as 1919, they decided that they would commemorate the university's war efforts and individuals' war efforts by having a tower. And so we document the building of the tower and its opening in the early 20s as well.